In the spring of 1931, workers clearing a foundation trench beneath a ruined temple near ancient Girsu lifted a sealed clay jar from soil undisturbed for 4,000 years. Inside lay one tablet, wrapped in linen gone black with age. The cataloguer spent 40 minutes with it, wrote a single cautious line in the ledger, and locked it in a basement drawer. It stayed there, unread for 37 years. When a young Dutch philologist finally translated it in 1968, he stopped working for 3 days. The tablet describes the wolves. It says they watched us first and then they chose. The story of how the tablet came back into the light begins with a man named Willem Aldering, a junior Assyriologist from Leiden, who arrived at the University of Pennsylvania Museum in the autumn of 1968 on a 12-month research exchange. Aldering was 29 years old, a specialist in the administrative texts of the Third Dynasty of Ur, and he had been handed the assignment that no senior scholar in the building wanted. The staff called it the Overflow Collection, a body of roughly 160 minor tablets, fragments, and seal impressions recovered from the excavation seasons of 1929 through 1932 and never formally examined. Most of the overflow was exactly what everyone assumed it to be: receipts for barley, tallies of wool, lists of temple labourers and the rations owed to them at the turning of each month. The kind of bureaucratic sediment that gathers in the corners of every Mesopotamian excavation and waits, sometimes for generations, for someone with enough patience and enough obscurity to be assigned to read it. In his 7th week, Aldering opened drawer 11. Inside it, wrapped in a length of linen that had gone stiff and black with age, was a tablet no larger than a spread hand, its surface carrying cuneiform pressed with unusual care, the wedges fine and evenly weighted, as though the scribe had understood that what he was setting down would never be set down again. The catalogue card gave the accession number G127 and a single line of description, written in 1931 by an assistant cataloguer who noted in his own hand that he had spent 40 minutes with the piece. The line read, "Narrative of uncertain character concerning animals. Defer to senior staff. No senior staff had ever come. The tablet had waited 37 years." Aldering would later write in a private letter to a colleague at the Oriental Institute in Chicago that he knew within the first 10 lines that the tablet did not belong in the overflow collection at all. "It has been filed among the receipts," he wrote, "and it is not a receipt. It is a deed of transfer, and I do not yet understand what was transferred or to whom." The paleography dated the piece to the final generations of the Third Dynasty of Ur, more than 4,000 years before his own time. The clay itself was dense and finely levigated, temple grade, the kind reserved for documents meant to outlast the men who wrote them. It had been fired deliberately, not sun-dried, a step taken only for records intended to survive, and it had been sealed inside a foundation jar beneath a temple wall, which is not where the Sumerians kept receipts. It is where they kept things they wanted the earth to hold. The scribe identifies himself in the opening lines by a name that translates roughly as Nammah-sig, son of Lu-dingira. A temple official attached to a sanctuary, the tablet calls the House of the Outer Lamp. Aldering spent 3 months on that phrase alone. No sanctuary of that name appears in any other text from Girsu, or anywhere else. His eventual conclusion, defended in the unpublished manuscript he completed in 1974, was that the House of the Outer Lamp was not a building, it was an office, a responsibility. The temple that stood where the settled land ended and the open country began, charged with the keeping of the boundary between them. We will return to that detail because it matters more than it sounds. The opening of the text is formal. It invokes the high gods, asks the favour of the scribe of heaven, and declares that what follows is a true accounting of an old matter given to the writer by his father, who received it from his father. Going back, the tablet says, to the days when men were few and the fires were small and the wolves still stood outside the light. That last phrase, "the wolves still stood outside the light," appears 4 times across the surface of the tablet, and each time the scribe writes it, he uses the same doubled wedge that Sumerian officials reserved for boundary markers on land agreements. As though the sentence itself were a property line. As though he were recording where something ended and something else began. Before the account itself, Nammah-sig pauses to state his reason for writing, and the sentence is difficult to read as anything but a warning. "The sons of this house call the creature by the small name," he writes. "They feed it at the door and think the feeding is the whole of the matter. I write so that the terms will not be lost, for a debt that is forgotten is not a debt that is ended." What Aldering read next, alone at a long table in the museum's reading room on the evening of November the 19th, 1968, was the reason the tablet had been sealed inside a foundation jar in the first place. The scribe had recorded the coming of the wolves to the dwellings of men, not their capture, not their taming, their coming. The tablet states, in the flat administrative voice that Sumerian officials reserved for matters of record, that the wolves watched the camps of men for 100 generations, and that at the end of the watching they made a decision, and the decision was theirs. According to the museum's own reading room log, which still exists, Aldering signed out at 8:51 that evening. He signed back in 3 days later, on the morning of November the 22nd, and requested photographic plates of both faces of the tablet. He never explained in any letter or note that survives where he spent those 3 days or what he decided in them. His landlady on Spruce Street would later tell a colleague only that his light had stayed on. He worked on the tablet for the remainder of his exchange year, and then, after returning to Leiden, on photographs and hand copies for 6 years more. Colleagues who knew him in this period describe a precise, unexcitable man who had become quietly consumed. He declined a permanent position at Heidelberg. He published almost nothing else. His sister would later say that he kept a single line from the tablet pinned above his desk in his own transliteration, and that when she asked him what it meant, he told her the line was not his to explain. He said the line belonged to the dogs. The tablet, for its part, gives no sign that its scribe expected to be doubted. Nammah-sig was not composing a myth. He believed plainly and completely that he was preserving the terms of an agreement still in force. An agreement, he writes, that men did not negotiate. Men were only the beneficiaries. The negotiating party stood on 4 legs, outside the firelight, and waited to be noticed. What the tablet describes next is the age before, and the scribe sets it down the way he would set down the boundaries of a field, without wonder and without haste, because to him it was simply the condition from which the terms arose. Men were few, the tablet says, and the dwellings of men were small. Each settlement was a ring of fires, and beyond the ring lay the open country. And the open country did not belong to men. It belonged to what moved in it. The scribe does not describe the wolves as the danger. He is careful on this point, and Aldering underlines the passage twice in his working copy. The wolves were of the open country, but they were not what the open country sent against the fires. The wolves, the tablet says, could see what the open country sent. Men could not. The scribe names the affliction of that age in a phrase Aldering rendered, after long hesitation, as the thin hours. In the thin hours, which came in the stillness after the middle of the night and lasted until the grey before dawn, sleepers at the edge of the firelight were found in the morning cold and emptied. Without wound and without mark, their faces turned toward the open country. Children would not sleep on the outer side of the ring. When their fathers asked them why, the children pointed past the flames and would not be persuaded, and the tablet records that the fathers stopped asking because the fathers, in the part of themselves that they did not speak of at the fires, already knew. The elders tried what elders try. They built the fires higher, and the affliction waited until the fires fell. They set watchmen, and the watchmen saw nothing, because there was nothing that eyes of men were made to see. They moved the settlements, and the affliction moved with them, because the affliction was not of a place. It was drawn to men, the tablet says, the way cold is drawn to an open door. And through all of it, at the edge of every camp, beyond the reach of the light, the wolves sat and watched. The tablet gives this period a name that Aldering translated as the Long Watching, and states its span in a formula the Sumerians used for eras beyond counting, 100 generations of men. For 100 generations, the scribe records, the wolves came at dusk to the rim of the firelight and sat, in ones and twos and in silent rings of many. And they did not hunt the herds of men, and they did not answer the calls of their own kind in the hills, and no man could say why they came. The men threw stones at first. The wolves withdrew beyond the stones and sat again. The men threw scraps later, in the way men will test any silence. The wolves took the scraps or did not, and it changed nothing in their manner, and the scribe notes this in a line of strange tenderness. They did not come for the meat, he writes. The meat was only the thing we could see ourselves giving. What the wolves were doing in those 100 generations, the tablet says plainly, was watching the thin hours. They could see what circled the camps of men. They could see it, the scribe writes, the way men see smoke, and they could hear the shape of it moving. And they knew it of old because the wolves had contended with it in the open country since before men had fire, and had paid for that contention into currency. the tablet names only once, and the line is damaged, and Aldering leaves the gap in his translation unfilled with a single bracketed note that reads, "The cost to them is stated here, and I cannot recover it." "The wolves watched," the tablet says, "and the wolves weighed." That is the word the scribe uses, the word of the marketplace and the tribunal, the word for silver against a standard. For 100 generations the wolves weighed the dwellings of men, and at the end of the weighing, on a night the tablet marks with the doubled wedge of a boundary, the decision was made. The scribe describes the first crossing in 11 lines, and Aldering wrote in the margin beside them that he had read the passage perhaps 200 times and had never once managed to read it quickly. On that night, at the coldest turning of the thin hours, when the fires were embers and the affliction was close, an old she-wolf rose from the rim of the darkness and walked into the light of a shepherd camp on the outer edge of the settled land. She did not lower her head, the tablet says, and she did not show her teeth. She walked past the embers, past the frozen men, to the outermost sleeper, a boy set apart at the edge of the ring, and she lay down between the boy and the open country, facing outward, and she stayed until dawn. No man moved that night, the scribe records, and in the morning the boy woke, and the men counted the sleepers, and the count was whole. The next night she came again, and brought 2 of her grown sons, and they lay at the other openings of the camp, facing outward. Within a season, the tablet says, there was no camp on the edge of the settled land that slept without its watchers, and the affliction of the thin hours, which no fire and no wall and no watchman of men had ever turned aside, met the wolves at the boundary and was turned. The men of that age understood what they were seeing, the scribe insists, better than the men of his own. They did not say the wolves were tamed. Nammah-sig sets the correction down in the flat voice of a clerk amending a false entry in a ledger. "It is written among the ignorant that we took the creature in," he writes. "We took in nothing. We were inspected for 100 generations, and at the end of the inspection, we were accepted. Let the entry be corrected." They came, he writes, on terms. The terms were 7, and his father had taught them to him, as his father's father had before, in the order in which the wolves had set them. The heart of the tablet, the passage that kept Aldering's light burning on Spruce Street for 3 nights, is the sequence in which the scribe records the 7 terms of the agreement. He writes them in order, in the calm administrative voice that Sumerian scribes reserved for all serious matters, as though he were listing the obligations of 2 parties to a boundary contract. In a sense, the tablet would say, that is exactly what he was doing. The first term is the keeping of the watch. The wolves undertook to stand in the thin hours between the sleepers and the open country every night, in every dwelling of men, without lapse and without end. This is the wolves' side of the contract, and it is stated first because everything else follows from it. The creature that descends from them still keeps it. It positions itself, without instruction, between the people of the house and the door. It sleeps lightly and never entirely, and its sleep, the scribe writes, is a listening that wears the appearance of resting. Anyone who has ever watched a dog rise in the deepest hour of the night and stand facing a silent window, ears forward, body still, has seen the first term being honoured, exactly as it was recorded 4,000 years ago. The second term is the nearness. The wolves required, and the tablet is explicit that this was required and not permitted, that they lie against the sleepers, the length of their bodies along the length of ours. The men of the first camps found this strange and then found they could not sleep without it. The tablet explains the term in a single line. What circles in the thin hours reaches for a sleeper who lies alone, and it cannot reach through the watcher. The weight of a dog against your legs at night is not the dog seeking warmth, the tablet would say. It is the second term. The warmth is only the thing we can see ourselves receiving. The third term is the sharing of the kill. The wolves would eat from the hands of men, and the tablet's phrasing here stopped Aldering for a full month, because the scribe writes not that the wolves asked to be fed, but that the wolves consented to be fed. To take food from a hand, the scribe explains, is to enter the account of a household, to be written into it as kin are written, and a watcher who is not kin, the tablet says, watches from outside, and outside was precisely where the wolves could no longer do their work. They did not come for the meat. The tablet repeats the line here, the only sentence that appears in both halves of the text. The meat was the signature. The fourth term is the answering of the name. Each watcher would receive a name from the mouths of its household, and would come to that name and to no other. The scholars of our own age explain this as conditioning. The tablet explains it as an address. A thing that answers to a name, the scribe writes, can be called back from the edge of the dark, and a thing that can be called back can be sent forward. Anyone who has ever whispered a dog's name in an unlit house and heard from another room, the immediate soft percussion of feet has used the fourth term without knowing it was ever negotiated. The fifth term is the release of the young. The wolves undertook to give up their pups into the hands of men, to be raised inside the ring from blindness onward, so that each generation of watchers would be bound to its household before it was bound to anything else. The tablet calls the pups by a phrase Aldering rendered as the renewal of the guard. The scribe adds, without comment, that the first camps wept when the pups were brought, and that the she-wolves stood and watched the weeping and permitted it. The sixth term is the raising of the voice. When the watchers perceived what men could not, they would cry it aloud one post to the next, until the whole boundary of the settled land had been closed by sound. The sudden barking at nothing in the stillest hour, at a fence beyond which nothing visible stands, is not a failure of the animal's judgment. It is, the scribe writes, the sixth term in performance. The way is called shut, and the answering voices that ripple outward across a town, dog after dog into the distance, are the contract being honoured along the whole length of the line at once. Anyone who has lain awake at 3 a.m, listening to that chain of voices travel away from them into other streets, has heard the sixth term, passed from post to post, older than any city it crosses. The seventh term is the one Aldering, in a marginal note on his own manuscript, called the clause he was not qualified to annotate. It is the only term owed by men. The tablet states it in 14 words, and the scribe frames it with a blank band of clay above and below, the only passage on the entire surface given that distinction. The men of the dwellings would owe the watchers nothing, no service, no tribute, no payment of any kind, except this, that the watchers would never be made to keep the watch alone. Where the household went, the watcher would go. Where the household slept, the watcher would sleep. It would be spoken to, the tablet says, in the tongue of the house, though it could not answer, and it would be mourned at its death as the people of the house are mourned, and its grave would lie inside the boundary it had kept, not beyond it. That is the whole of what we owe, company. The tablet records no other payment in 4,000 years of the agreement. And then the scribe adds a single line that sits alone beneath the seventh term, set apart in the clay, the line Aldering kept pinned above his desk in Leiden, and would not explain to his sister, the line he needed, by his own account, 9 days to allow himself to write down in Dutch. The line reads, "They saw what was coming for us, and they did not go home." Aldering's manuscript offers no commentary on that sentence. He simply lets it stand, so does the tablet. The scribe moves on in the next line to the schedule of offerings at the house of the outer lamp, as though nothing had happened, as though the ledger had merely been brought current, the way a clerk rules a line beneath a settled account. Aldering completed his translation in the winter of 1974. It ran to 41 pages. He submitted it to 3 journals. All 3 rejected it. One returned the manuscript within 5 weeks with a letter stating that the subject matter fell outside the boundaries of serious philological publication. Another sent it for peer review and reported back that the 2 reviewers could not agree on whether the work was scholarship or an elaborate exercise in self-deception. The third kept the manuscript for 9 months and returned it without a single comment attached. He circulated it privately after that in typed carbon copies. To a small circle of colleagues at Leiden, Oxford, Chicago and Rome, the copies were passed hand to hand, photocopied, recopied, and over the following decades they settled into the quiet underground literature of fringe Mesopotamian studies, where they remain. The tablet itself was transferred in 1981 from the open archive of the Penn Museum to restricted storage in the lower basement, where access now requires the written approval of the curator of the Near Eastern collection. Researchers who have requested that approval over the past 4 decades report almost without exception the same outcome. The requests are denied, no reason is given. Drawer 11 stays closed. But the history that followed the scribe of the outer lamp reads, if the tablet is to be believed, like a long trail of evidence hiding in the open. Rome remembered, and remembered strangely, the city that would rule the world set at the centre of its origin, not a king and not a god, but a she-wolf standing over 2 human children, feeding them, guarding them in the open country where they had been left to die. Historians call it a founding legend, and the explanation ends there. The tablet does not end there. The tablet would say the Romans preserved the transaction with perfect accuracy and simply forgot which party it described. The wolf did not need the children needed the wolf, and the wolf came. the steppe peoples remembered. The Turkic nations traced their descent from a grey she-wolf who led their broken remnant out of a valley of slaughter to safety. The Mongols traced theirs to a wolf ancestor at the head of the line. Peoples who lived their entire lives on the open edge, the tablet would say, where the boundary of the dwelling is thinnest, kept the memory of who first held it. Norse memory kept the wolves of Odin at the foot of the high seat, fed from the god's own table while the god himself took only wine, and no reason for the arrangement survives. The tablet would say the reason is the third term. The meat was the signature. By the medieval centuries, the memory had thinned into stories of loyalty. The hound that would not leave the master's grave. The dog that woke the household before the fire was visible, before the flood arrived, before the intruder reached the door. We filed these under devotion, under instinct, under sharp ears and a good nose. The tablet filed them 4,000 years in advance, under the terms. And this is what Aldering's translation forces us to confront, if we accept it even provisionally. The story we tell about the dog is upside down. We say we domesticated the wolf, that we shaped a predator into a companion through patience and breeding and food. The tablet would say the shaping ran the other way, that we were the ones inspected for 100 generations by watchers who could see what we could not, that we were weighed camp by camp, fire by fire, the way silver is weighed against a standard, and that we were, at the end of the weighing, accepted on 7 terms, only one of which was ours to keep. As for why, the tablet comes to the edge of the answer and stops there. Near its end, the scribe turns briefly to the question of what the wolves saw approaching mankind in that age, the thing that moved in the thin hours, the thing the tablet says the wolves had contended with in the open country since before men had fire. He records that his father would not name it aloud, and that his father's father had taught that the naming itself was a door. He notes only that the wolves had watched it gather around the camps of men for 100 generations, growing patient, growing certain, and that the wolves had understood, sooner than we could have, what it would mean for everything under the sky if the fires of men went out. And in the final legible line before the schedule of offerings, the scribe writes this: "They did not choose us because we were strong. They chose us because we were what it wanted, and they had already decided it could not have us." The scribe does not say what it was. The tablet is silent. The drawer is closed. Aldering died in 1999 in Leiden, without seeing his translation published by any press. The carbon copies still circulate, and the dogs in every house and yard and farm and city street where they have made their postings continue. They keep the watch. They lie against the sleepers. They eat from our hands and answer to their names. They give up their young to us, blind and new, and they raise the alarm in the stillest hours, voice to voice across the dark along a boundary older than any wall ever raised on it. Whatever you believe about the tablet, whatever you believe about the thin hours or the long watching, there is one observation that requires no belief at all. If you live with a dog, watch it tonight. Watch where it chooses to lie when the lights go out. Watch which way it faces. Notice that it places itself, always, between you and the way in, and that no one in the history of your house has ever taught it to do that. Then remember the line the scribe set apart in blank clay, the sentence Aldering pinned above his desk for 30 years and would never explain. The 14 words he needed 9 days to allow himself to write down. They saw what was coming for us, and they did not go home. The 7th term was company. It is the only payment they have ever asked. And perhaps that is why, in the quietest hour of the night, when your dog lifts its head and holds the darkness with an attention nothing visible explains, it does not look to you for reassurance. It is not asking whether the watch is necessary. It knows. It has always known. It is only checking that you are still there, still inside the ring, still theirs to stand in front of. The account remains open. The watch has never once been lifted, and in 4,000 years, on their side of the agreement, there is no record of a single lapse.